Mick, welcome to Personality Politics, and thank you very much for talking to us.
My pleasure to be with you.
So, whereabouts are you at the moment, and how has lockdown been for you?
I'm at home, as I have been for several months, and lockdown is actually fine for us, works quite well.
You've had to cancel a tour, though.
Well, that's the unfortunate part. We held out for as long as we could in the hope that we might sort of provide some respite for this, you know. So by November, we were hoping that we would be able to entertain an audience, but it's just not turned out that way,
Yeah.
and we put it back a year.
Let's start on your own politics then. Do you recall your first ever political memory? What was the first moment you realised politics existed?
I'm very specific on this. It was my father and I huddled around a candle in 1972 in the middle of winter. I think there were miners' strikes and there were power cuts. We had no heating in the house, and my father was cursing both the government and the trade unions. I would say my father was a moderate. He felt that the trade unions were wielding too much power in the sense that they shouldn't really be in the business of bringing down governments. And at the same time, he wasn't a fan of the government either. So I think that labels him pretty much a moderate.
And how old were you in 1972, if you don't mind me asking?
I was 12. From then on, I sort of had an interest. I've always naturally veered towards the sort of centre ground. People that I admired growing up as a kid were
Mm.
people like Dennis Healey, Roy Jenkins, these kind of politicians that seemed to me even then sane and reasonable.
You huddling around that candle for light or for heat or for both?
For both, I would say I grew up in very modest terms. We had no hot water in the house except at the weekends when my dad would light a coal fire. Because there was just me and my dad, and so Sundays became a tradition of me having a bath first and then him getting in afterwards.
And your mum had left when you were at a young age.
When I was 3, so we were pretty much used to our
Mm.
environment. Our average sort of morning would be my dad would go downstairs and boil a kettle, go upstairs, pour half of the water into the bowl and have a shave, then leave me the rest of the water so I could have a wash and he would go downstairs and make breakfast. That was kind of roughly our average morning, then off to school and him off to work.
So, did you grow up with a feeling that life was inherently unfair and you wanted to do something about it, or was that just the way it was?
No, not my interest in politics actually is more process. I'm really interested watching people climb the greasy pole and or slide down it. I've never considered myself to be an extreme left winger or a right winger, just somebody like millions of other people that's sort of stuck in the middle.
And do you have a political hero when you were growing up? You said the likes of Dennis Healey. Was there someone you idolised or really respected?
Those two,
Mm.
Roy Jenkins and Dennis Seeley, especially. I just observed it with interest throughout my times. I remember during the infamous riots in Moss Side and Toxteth, I was living there at the time. We'd look out the window and you'd see sort of fires burning in the distance. And I remember recently meeting Michael Heseltine, of all people, on holiday. And
As one
I never
does.
got round. Well, I just had a little. I'd just meet him at breakfast and have very brief chats about what a disaster Brexit was and things. But I never thanked him because he did sort of change our lives a little bit. I used to. I lived in Moss Side in Hume for about 4 or 5 years,
Mm.
and then it sounds awfully glamorous. I used to spend the weekends in Toxteth because I used to be a DJ. My band would rehearse, and then I'd DJ in the evening for beer money, and used to stay in Toxteth overnight and then head back on the Ribble bus back into Manchester on Sunday evening. So, I led pretty glamorous lifestyle.
Did Michael Heseltine think about a rock star coming over to him at breakfast to thank him for
I,
regenerating Liverpool?
I honestly don't think he had the faintest idea who I was, which is fine by me. I rather like that.
You were quite happy to sing about politics. Money's Too Tight to Mention, Simply Red's first UK single, I think. Overtly political song. That didn't trouble you at all?
Oh no, we're talking much later on now. This we were, I'd be about 21, 22 when I first became aware of that song. We had one of the lads that I lived with. He was from Scunthorpe, and one of his friends was a miner, and we'd had miners sleeping on our floor when they had a big demonstration in Manchester. So it was very kind of close to home, and I could see the damage in the north that the Thatcher policies were doing. But then again, even that from a centrist point of view, I could understand that, it shouldn't be within the rights of Arthur Scargill to bring down governments. He went in with that intent. So as much as I despised Thatcher, I wasn't a fan of Arthur Scargill either, because I thought they were both making a mess of things.
But you still had miners sleeping on your floor out of solidarity, or were they mates? Why were they there?
Well, yeah, funnily enough, one of them was called Errol Flynn. We were out on a bit of a bender one night, and we got stopped by the police, and it led to one of the coppers asking him his name, and he said Errol Flynn, and he didn't believe him. I said, what's your real name, son? And he says, Errol Flynn. He said, if you say that one more time, I'm taking you in. And he said it, and off he went, and so we had all manner of adventures, but of course I cared very deeply about their plight, because I was from a northern community, and I could see what harm was being done. But as I say, that doesn't give anybody the right to try and bring down an elected government.
So you're in your early 20s. You'd voted by that stage. Had you cast your first vote? Who was it for?
I'd always been Labour. The northwest. It's just if you voted anything else but that, you were weird. It was like an indoctrination, and I was happy to sort of go along with it, really.
And then 1997, you publicly came out to declare for Labour. You became a donor. Why did you want to do that? Why did you want to wear your political colours so boldly on your sleeve?
I'd supported Neil Kinnock, actually, initially, and I admired him for the work that he did and tried to bring Labour back into the realms of the centre and the realms of sanity. He did a lot, and he was, in a way, he was an unsung hero. In fact, the night we won, I was down at the festival hall, and he was the first person I searched out, because I thought without the work that he'd done, Prime Minister Blair may not have ever happened. I partly financed Tony's leadership campaign as well, when it started to emerge that he was a contender, and I thought he would have made a great leader. And I think ultimately he did a great job.
And you voted for Foot as well before then, presumably, and then Kinnock throughout the 80s, always Labour.
Well, I just thought that Foot was unelectable, in the same way that I thought that Corbyn was. People generally just don't live in that far left or far right world. They want to get on with their lives, and they want some sort of reason and sanity. And I just felt that these Michael Foot, God bless him, just was too extreme.
But why did you decide to tell everybody you were a Labour Party donor and supporter? Surely your agent at the time would have said, Mick, don't do this. All you're going to do is alienate every single Tory who want to buy your records, and your business is going to suffer.
Absolutely, Tom. That's a great point. Most music managers advise their artists to steer well away from politics. I just steered away from the extremes. At the beginning of my career, I was invited to join the Red Wedge, and we felt at the time that they were too extreme. The Red Wedge was a group of musicians. I think Billy Bragg was one of them, Paul Weller. It was very much on the left, and it was too left for me, and so we avoided it. I just felt that at the time the country needed a kind of centre ground party, and Tony Blair represented that. And of course, serving the 3 terms that he did proved that he was very successful.
So you were one of the great stars of New Labour's celebrity culture, and you must have gone to all those parties, the Downing Street New Labour, Cool Labour parties. I mean, you were at the heart of all that. What was it like, those odd mixtures of cool and politicians? Oasis rubbing shoulders with cabinet ministers.
There was a huge feeling of optimism. In fact, initially, I'd wanted to organise a concert, and I still feel the same way, that I don't think our health workers, ambulance workers, doctors, nurses, people in the health service are paid enough money. They should be paid more. And I wanted to organise a concert, but there were very, very cautious times as well, with with Alistair Campbell and the people around them wanting to make sure that they didn't sort of head into sort of Harold Wilson territory, that they just kind of kept everybody on side, and they didn't want to make too many waves. And so they thought that was a bad idea. And I was a bit disappointed with that, because I think it would have been a great opportunity for them to get the nation behind them to lend support to the NHS workers and stuff. But it just didn't happen that way. But still, nevertheless, there was huge investments in education and in the health service. So I felt that they were heading in the right direction.
Mick, I have this memory from my early 20s, I suppose, when I would attend Labour Party conference. And I remember, I didn't speak to you, but I remember seeing you in the conference hotel bar. Now, you were like spending your time normally on top of the pops. And then you're at a bar at a party political conference. I mean, you must have been bored out of your mind.
Not at all. No, as I said to you earlier, I'm very interested in the political process. I wouldn't consider myself a campaigner in any way, but I'm just very interested in politics. It's just something I've had, as I said earlier, since I was a young kid, and I was happy to lend my support because I thought they were doing good things.
So, Mick, at the time of the US and UK invasion of Iraq, 2003, you again entered into the political fray and came up to say that you had more respect for Blair than ever for doing that. And that, again, was not an uncontroversial view.
That was really, how do you say this, getting behind the party, getting behind the support. I was never keen on it, but I supported it. I made a mistake, I think, actually, because anybody at that time would have wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But the real issue it comes down to is, what the hell did it have to do with September the 11th at the end of the day? And I still don't think we've been given a satisfactory answer as to what overthrowing Saddam Hussein had to do with September the 11th. There still hasn't been a satisfactory answer to that. I think it's universally acknowledged now that that was probably Prime Minister Blair's greatest error, was climbing into bed with an extreme right-wing Republican administration. And it's tarnished his reputation, and it's such a shame, because I think so many good things were done during that time. But Iraq will always cast a shadow over that administration, which is, very, very unfortunate.
So we get to the middle of the last decade. You became a very bitter public critic of Ed Miliband, leader of the Labour Party at the time. You described him as veering close to Marxism. I
still think that's the case, and it was the wrong Miliband, as far as I was concerned. And in fact, you could argue that it was Iraq that elected the wrong Miliband. That it was Iraq that empowered the left within the Labour movement. And I really did nothing personal, actually, towards Ed Miliband. I don't know him. I've got nothing against him personally. But the politics, I just got alarm bells ringing in my head. I thought, well, oh God, we're going back to pre-Blair Labour, which was, in many respects unelectable. And, I unfortunately proved to be correct in both Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn.
I was going to say, you got even ruder about Jeremy Corbyn. I think you called him a shabby, spineless coward.
Well, oh boy, did I? Okay. Well, I guess I did. Yeah, I'll put my hands up. But I just knew he was unelectable. And I just knew the British people would not elect him, and they didn't.
Did you vote for either men in the 2015 or 2017 general elections?
No, I didn't.
So the main man from Simply Red wasn't red?
I didn't vote at the time. No, I just couldn't do it.
You didn't vote for their rivals, the Tory leaders, either?
I just don't think my DNA would somehow process that possibility. Somehow, we're talking about years of indoctrination, Having said that, there are people that I have admired within the Conservative Party. I mentioned Lord Heseltine. I very much like and admire Ken Clarke. I find it strangely ironic, though, that Boris Johnson, who seems to be in some respects, from certain policies that he's espousing, to be a one-nation Tory, and yet he kind of effectively neutered many one nation Tories within his own party. I don't quite understand that one. Maybe you can explain that one.
Could you ever vote for Boris Johnson? You've just called him a one nation. That doesn't sound too far away from your politics.
I don't know what he is. I'm not even sure that he knows what he is, depending on which way he gets out of bed in the morning. I don't see any philosophical consistency. It seems like he'll say one thing to one person and then say something to another just to sort of try and get them on side. I don't see a man of principle in any shape or form. I remain very confused by him, and I certainly wouldn't vote for him. I'm optimistic, though, about Sir Keir Starmer. He strikes me as somebody that has reason and sanity and will attract people in the centre ground who've been alienated and disenfranchised for so long. So I'm optimistic about him. And also, I think the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, seems to be quite a reasonable sort of person. Right. I mean, look, I would just love to see the politics move into the centre ground so that we can represent the vast majority of the population. You know, I would love to see politicians working together on a cross-party basis, especially in a time of crisis like this, to actually improve the nation and focus on that. It seems that in this kind of Trumpian Boris era, we've politicised almost everything. Everything's political. One loses the will to live sometimes, the way things are going.
You were also strong Remainer. That vote didn't go your way. We're leaving the EU. Are you still a strong Remainer, or has that ship now sailed? Do you accept that we're out?
I think it's a catastrophe. I've still yet to see a solution to the Northern Irish border, which I think is the one thing that's really going to bring this home. Is I don't know how you square that circle. I'm very unhappy about where we're headed. I would much prefer that we would negotiate and reform the European Union from within, which was really an argument that Lady Thatcher espoused. I don't see how walking away from one of our biggest trading partners is beneficial to anybody. But as we are out, I'm sort of sitting back like some kind of observer, wondering how they're going to pull this one off, because I just don't see how they're going to do it.
You just complained about everything being politicised these days. Would you describe yourself as woke?
I have absolutely no idea. It seems to mean one thing to one person and another thing to another. All I get from society at the moment is great division and fragmentation and not enough. There are no real unifying spirits in the ether at the moment. I just don't really see that the people that are trying to bring people together are even being listened to. That we're so fragmented that you don't really know what day it is half the time.
You're active on Twitter and I enjoy your tweets, but you've got into trouble recently for ranking cultures by coolness on a tweet, putting African Americans as the coolest and working class Brits and then Jamaicans. But people had a go at you for that, for the very process of ranking cultures as a racist endeavour. You obviously dispute that charge.
I think it's absurd. I use Twitter mostly actually as a news bar. If you follow the right people, you know, I have interests in wine, science, politics, and I follow people like your good self. In fact, I follow both of you, I think. I use it mostly to get information and get links to other things, and it's fantastic for that. And occasionally I express an opinion. I was expressing that at that time because I've known America since 1985. And America is a segregated, racist country. And, you know, by the time we got to there in the 80s, it was as if they'd all swept it under the carpet and just pretended it wasn't happening. I'd been told personally in my own career by 2 radio programmers on 2 separate occasions that I was too black for white radio and too white for black radio. And I found it really depressing, America, at the time, because it just seemed that everything was just unspoken and hidden, and now you see it sort of coming to a head. I'm very optimistic now about what's going on the ground, not so much in the White House, but on the ground, that people are finally realizing that they've got to sort of step up, and that this kind of segregation and racism has to stop, you know. And by the way, African Americans are the coolest culture on planet Earth. Their dress, their music, everything, and they should be praised and admired for the incredible contribution that, you know, speaking from a musical point of view more than anything, from the time of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington in the 20s, they have literally led the way. You know, without African Americans, there would be no Beatles, no Rolling Stones, no Led Zeppelin. They just wouldn't have happened. You know, I'm a huge jazz buff, so I'm speaking mainly from a musical point of view, but they are so cool, and they deserve praise and great respect and admiration.
So why are people jumping down your throat when you say that?
Because people do, don't they? This is Twitter enablers. You say one thing and it just gets twisted to be something else. I saw the same thing with J.K. Rowling, who I admire enormously for her talents, and speaking with great sincerity and being absolutely crucified. And you cannot win in that world. The best thing is to do is just express what you want to express, or not. But as I said to you, I use Twitter mostly as a news bar.
You have won loads of awards for your musical contribution. One of those awards was an Outstanding Achievement Awards at the Mobos, Music of Black Origin. We have now this debate about cultural appropriation. What do you think of the idea that some people, when white musicians win these awards, they say that musicians of one ethnicity should not borrow themes from another ethnicity?
Well, maybe Charlie Parker shouldn't have played saxophone that was invented by a white Belgian. You can make these analogies that just go on throughout the century. Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, African-American musicians playing Western instruments, saxophones and trumpets that were all invented by white Westerners. You know, where do you draw the line? Do you say George Gershwin couldn't write Summertime? You know, it just goes on and on and on. And I'm happy in the company of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and all these people that just try to bring people together, not to divide them. This cultural appropriation is largely based on ignorance, actually. If you don't know your music history, and I take great pride in knowing my musical history, then you know nothing. So the best thing to do, if you don't know what you're talking about, probably best just sort of zip it.
Now, there is a modern day adage for Twitter. Here comes the bit of personality politics where we have to try and define you. So here goes, and tell me if I've got you right or wrong. I'm going to put you down as an old school centrist social democrat. Am I right?
I'll buy that. Yeah, sounds reasonable to me.